Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri, and each week I meet with military veterans to learn about their civilian career, what they do, how they got there, and advice for other veterans seeking to do the same. Today's episode number 234 with Mark Horstman back for a second interview.
It's not hard in the sense of complex or difficult to understand. It just requires some discipline. And that's how a lot of military people are going to win in the job market in the next 12 to 18 months is discipline. All things being equal, I want somebody who's super smart, who works really hard, who's ambitious, and who's nice. But you know what? You can come across as smart and working hard and ambitious simply by the level of preparation you put into it. I would much rather hire the person who is busting his tail and had a good career than the person was a 4.0 in college, had an awesome career, but then acts as if he should be handed something on a silver platter in my interview.
Well, this is my second interview with Mark Horstman, and if you haven't listened to episode number 193, definitely check that out. He talks about becoming a #1 iTunes business podcast, thousands and thousands of episodes. Mark is an absolute baller. In this interview, we talk about combating negative self-talk, about the Horstman Christmas Rule, and we go through a very tactical, detailed process for understanding oneself. I've placed my notes from this process in the show notes as well, because I think it's so valuable for listeners to go through this process. And as a special reminder, the Beyond the Uniform coaching program is a fantastic way to delve right in with a certified coach to deepening your self-knowledge and identifying your next career move. My apologies on this interview. I think there was a problem with my wireless during the interview. There are times where it cuts in and out, so it's not the highest fidelity interview I've published. That said, I was able to kind of fill in the gaps as Mark was talking, and Mark is one of those guys where he's got so much knowledge, you just want to get out of his way and let him talk as much as possible. So we got a lot packed into this second interview, and as a tribute to Mark's, just what he has to offer, it's still just scratching the surface of his knowledge. So enjoy this episode, and with that, let's dive in to my conversation with Mark. Well, joining me again today in Pebble Beach, California is Mark Horstman. Mark, welcome back to Beyond the Uniform.
Thanks, Justin. Good to be here.
And so for listeners, to give you some context, back in episode 193, Mark was generous with his time. He hopped on the podcast, and we talked about a lot of different things. Some things we touched on were resume advice, interview advice, telling your story. And at the end, Mark offered to get back on the show and dive into more tactical advice for veterans thinking about their career transition and also thinking about leading in the civilian world. I took him up on it. I'm very grateful for his time again. And also just a quick plug, last time Mark was on the show, he offered, they have a great component that reviews your resume. I know one of our team members and many listeners took him up on that, and Wendy from his team has been exceptional in looking through these resumes and providing just some exceptional help. So wanted to give another plug for that. I'll add that in the show notes, and appreciate your doing that. So Mark, maybe to pick up the conversation, I'm curious, well, maybe to start things off, when you talk to military veterans, do you ever see like consistencies in misconceptions they have about their civilian career and what that's going to look like?
Yeah, probably the biggest one is the sense of I don't know, I don't understand, I don't know how companies are structured, or I don't know where the jobs are. Just literally don't know. And a good example, a way to help you think about that, if you're thinking about getting out of the service, is when you've talked to civilians, some of the things they say make you realize they really don't understand the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. The classic one was, I remember a few years ago, somebody said, "Oh, you were in the Army?" I said, "Yeah, many years ago." And he said, "Well, when?" I said, "Oh, in the 80s. And he says, "Oh, my dad was in in the Army in the 80s. You know him. Come on. 1 million people in the Army. Well, it's bigger than any company. Why? So that naivety from civilians about the military is absolutely echoed by military people getting out in the civilian world. Now, the mistake that is made about that, though, is that we have veterans telling themselves negative stories about their lack of knowledge. Guys, this just like being a Harvard MBA. If you are graduating from Harvard with an MBA and you're being interviewed on campus, and they say to you, "Well, what makes you special?" The guy who says, "Well, I have a Harvard MBA." Look, 600 guys, 6 folks graduating along with you with Harvard MBA. That's the reason I'm here. That's not a distinguisher. By the same token, somebody. The fact that you don't know anything about corporate America is not relevant. Nobody cares. Yes, technically, if you've gotten an MBA in your spare time and you understand how marketing and sales are different and completely different form of sales, those are all clever things to know, but they happen on the margins. The things that matter most, you don't. There's the issue of you not knowing how companies they do or what jobs are is irrelevant to your search. It is. I mean, I'm not saying that it's guaranteed to be a 0% chance, but it's only 1% of the overall effectiveness of your search. So that's a common theme. Oh, I don't know anything. It doesn't matter. I mean, I went to Procter & Gamble. I was a mechanical engineer from the academy. I then spent 5 years leading soldiers. When I was asked what I wanted to do, I said, well, it seems to me I have a technical degree. I'm good leading men. I'll be a production guy. I'll be in a manufacturing plant somewhere, right? That was me. And by the way, I was fairly knowledgeable about corporate America. I'd been reading business books for a number of years, but I didn't know. I literally didn't know. And then the guy who was recruiting me said, I really think you ought to consider sales. And I have to tell you, Justin, it flashed through my mind. That's not good. I don't want to sell anything. That's bad. Well, turns out I was really good at sales. And to this day, I mean, I understand now, but I didn't know what I was doing the first 3 months. On the other hand, most fresh college graduates don't know what they're doing in the first 3 months. Most people joining a different company don't know what they're doing in the first 3 months. So that misconception, well, not knowing a lot is not a big deal. The problem where it becomes a big deal is people begin to think negatively about themselves, apply for less positions, at the cloud over their head. Oh, I don't know anything about companies. Oh, I'm afraid they're going to ask me and it'll make me feel stupid. Oh, I don't know whether to put this on my resume or not. And if you're not careful, you end up talking yourself out of interviewing as often as possible, trusting yourself. You can't guarantee that you're going to have a good search, but I guarantee you'll have a worse search if all you do is tell yourself, well, I don't know anything and this is going to be hard and so on. Optimism, as Colin once said, optimism is a force multiplier. Don't be pessimistic about your chances, and certainly don't let that pessimism derive from I don't know anything, because we don't care whether you know something or not.
I love it. I mean, the quote that I heard that I think of a lot with entrepreneurship is that entrepreneurship is 90% psychology and 10% skills. And I like to think that, based on what you're saying, maybe it's not that high of the percentage, but a significant portion of this is mindset, and it's having that openness to new possibilities and challenges and not doubting yourself, not counting yourself out.
Yes, and I would say here's my experience about psychology and skills. Most people, I would skills in psychology, and I would even give a big skills, if only to tell people you're probably not going to change your psychology if you're a 25 or a 30-year-old. I encourage you to do so. I encourage you to be a positive person. I encourage you to introduce yourself. Listen to our podcast about how to shake hands, how to introduce yourself, how to remember names, and so on. Those things are all good. And don't believe for a minute that your personality makes you not a friendly person. You can be or better in an interview. On the other hand, the reason I focus so much on skills is because I don't care what your personality is. If you have killer skills, which come from patience and rehearsal, if you have killer skills, you can outperform somebody with one of those natural personalities. Good companies don't care about natural personalities. What they want is people who are prepared, who know what they want, who have prepared well enough to know that they want to be in the interview, and they can talk cogently about their background. A personality, psychology. I agree with you about entrepreneurs, but gosh, part of entrepreneurship is saying, oh, I can do that, and then, well, how are we going to do it? I don't know. Figure it out. We're pretty smart. It'll be okay. And I encourage people, to your point, that they approach it as, yeah, sure, I'll take that interview. And I don't know anything about this company. I don't know anything about this job exactly, but I could probably ask around, and certainly your listeners can send an email to us, and we'll be happy to help them a little bit. But believe it's going to be okay. And the definition of the word believe is to act as if. So act if you're going to get a job. Act as if opportunities, don't talk yourself out of it. And then if you're prepared, fortune favors the prepared, obviously.
I love it. What about, I had two questions that came up since you were talking about sales. And the first one is that I would say that this is probably interview number 230 or so. Most of the veterans I've interviewed about their civilian career talk about the difficulty they face, especially in their first interview, around selling themselves or advocating for themselves or speaking of what they've accomplished in the military. And it seems like the trend is they're okay talking about what their team did. They're okay talking about what their subordinates did. But when it comes to really taking ownership of their own achievements, they fall short. And the perception of many of the people I've interviewed is that they are competing with, in the interview process, people who have had that 5 or 10 years of interview experience that have no problem speaking about their abilities, and so they really fall short. And I'm wondering if you have any advice about how a veteran might approach selling themselves in an interview.
Yeah, okay. First of all those veterans you're talking to are being idiotic. Okay, that's wrong. What they think and what is happening are completely divergent. First of all, if you're a veteran and you say, well, I haven't interviewed, again, this is negative self-talk, right? If you say I interviewed and you say, these guys in corporate America, they're interviewing all the time. Well, they haven't. We have a rule here at our company. It's called the Horstman Christmas Rule. And the rule is, most people in the first world, Western world, celebrate Christmas, the Christmas holiday. And every year you look forward to it, and it is an incredibly busy time. You enjoy it and so on. And then when you get done, you're wiped out. Everybody's so happy to some degree that all the parties are over, and then we're just going to have Christmas morning and Christmas dinner. And then on the 26th, we got to come. I don't have to do anything. The reason why that happens, that sense of just wiped outness after a busy holiday party and family season, is because Christmas is A, important to you, and B, you do it. People don't learn from things that happen rarely in their life. The average corporate person is not interviewing every year. They're not even interviewing every 2 or 3 years. Maybe they're interviewing every 5 years. But in some cases, somebody who's 30 years old may have not interviewed since they got their first job. You might say, well, how did they get promoted? Well, you don't have to interview to get promoted. Or even if you do interview, if it's an internal interview, it's very soft. And or if in fact they got a job and they weren't well prepared, good background, they probably had a terrible interview, but they got the job. And so they may have in fact learned bad interviewing habits from the fact that, right, on a fluke, they happen to be in the right place at the right time. There is stopping a military veteran from being in the top 5% what any interviewer wants an interviewee to do. Nothing. Gap is 98% closable by preparation. Simple as that. Okay, that's part of your question. The other part of the question, the issue of, well, I don't want to talk about myself. I don't. Let me put it this way. I'm a pretty outgoing, a pretty direct guy, much to my own dismay at times. People ask me my opinion, and I tell them, and then my wife says, they really didn't want your opinion. So, well, I'm sorry. I kind of thought they did because they asked me for it. And they just seem to think that I should agree with them. Okay. But when I go to church, I sit quietly. I am reflective. I'm not forceful. Somebody else is in charge. I follow the rules. I sing what I'm supposed to sing. I pray what I'm supposed to pray. How is it then that so many people are saying, oh, I can't tout myself in an interview? I gotta tell you, this is going to sound really harsh, and I'm sorry, but I want to shake your folks up. And part of the reason I want to shake folks up is there has never been a better interviewing, there has never been a job market than right now. In the history of mankind, in the modern world, modern organizations, there has never been a better time in the next year or so. Actually, I'll be reasonable and say in the next 6 months, in the first 6 months of 2019, there will never be a better time for someone to be looking for a job. Now, it may not be a good time for you to leave the military. You're wrong about that. But if you have a choice, and if you're wondering what the market is like, I would be shocked if you didn't know it, because it's a headline on the Wall Street Journal in every business section of every paper, which people ought to be reading in order to prepare for your transition. You can't heck, even if you listen to CNN or Fox News or whatever, you'll find that the market is really good. So now is absolutely the right time. Okay. There is nobody who's listening to you who wants to grow, wants to develop, wants to make a good transition. There's no one to you who isn't smart enough to understand what interviews are about contextually, just like my example of me in church. Okay. It is your job in an interview to talk about yourself. Now, this is not bragging. There's a saying, I used to live in Texas. In Texas, there's a saying, it ain't if you've done it. Okay. Now, you don't want to go too far with that. You don't want to walk around telling people all the things you've done. But by gosh, Justin, if somebody says to you, give me an example of a significant accomplishment, tell me what you did and how you did, please include as well the team you had around you and so on. If somebody then says, I'm uncomfortable talking about what I did, then that person shouldn't get out of the service, or they should be practicing now to eliminate their. I tell people all the time, the first time somebody does something, they're terrible at it. The biggest improvement you'll ever make in your life at a skill is the second time you do it. Because the first time you're just awful, right? I happen to be we're in a golf club, the first time you do it, you're lucky to hit the ball. And then you get better and better and better. And then slowly pieces get smaller and smaller and smaller. But this idea somehow, I don't want to talk about myself. I'm a humble soldier. Get over it. That's like saying, well, because I'm this way in this situation, I have to be that way in all situations. Look, if the Pentagon is a client of me and I go to the Pentagon, if I meet a general, I resigned. I got out of the Army as a captain. If I meet a general, I'm going to call him sir. Now, on the other hand, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is a member of my golf club here in Monterey, Mike Mullen. When I meet Mike, I call him Mike. Now, am I getting Mike? I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable doing that. I have to call you Admiral. I just don't buy the sentiment. So folks, if you're listening, you don't have a choice. You're going to be asked what you have done. If you are so uncomfortable that you can't talk about yourself, or that you think it's all about your team, and folks, it is not. Take it from a guy who's been coaching, interviewing for the last 30 years of my life. It's not about them. It is about you. Now, if we're interviewing you for a management job and you talk about you talk about your team and how you communicate with them, great. So much the better. But if somebody tells you what is the toughest goal you ever set for yourself and how did you go about achieving it, the goal setting that you chose surely was not a committee, right? So you can't blame somebody else for the goal. You're talk about what your mindset was, because the company is trying to understand your decision-making skills, your goal skills, your ability to overcome objective or obstacles along the way. So yes, of course, mention your team, but you either have a choice of preparation to overcome your discomfort, or you have a choice of not showing up. And I got to tell you something else. People tell me, oh, I'm uncomfortable. I said, well, good. That means you're learning. And if it were easy, everybody could. You don't want it to be easy. You don't want to pray for it to be easy. You want to pray for the strength to do it. And to tell you the truth, it's like, gosh, when I was in the Army, at the end of my time in the Army, I could clean my weapon dark with one hand tied behind. Why? Because I'd done it 5,000 times. And that way, if I had to clean it in a moment of risk, I could. So that's all this is. It is a challenge that is outside of your comfort zone. And how do you do that? You come up with a plan. And if you listen to all of our podcasts, many of which are, I think, 60 of the 80 that we provided in the series are free, you'll figure out a basic plan for how to get ready for interviewing. And there will be some people who say, yeah, I'm never going to be good at an interview. I would say two things. The chances that is true is totally a function. It's either an excuse to not prepare, or for the person who's willing to prepare, the chances that statement is actually true is less than 5%. You can prepare yourself to be great in the context of an interview, even if you are naturally a humble person. And to tell you the truth, I want you to be humble. But don't tell me you're humble when I ask you specifically in an interview, tell me about an accomplishment, because the way companies interview today is with behavioral interviewing. So I think there's a false modesty at work there, and it's an excuse. No offense. I know I'm not making any friends right now, but I always wanted, when I was in my career, gamble and as a recruiter, the unvarnished truth. And the unvarnished truth is too many people use the I don't like talking about myself as an excuse to not prepare and to essentially foreshadow an unsuccessful transition. And it's not necessary. The young people that are today are so much better as soldiers, as sailors, as airmen than I was, because of the quality of the force today. There are more companies than ever desperate to hire military veterans. Jobs for veterans. All you have to do is Google jobs for veterans. And Google doesn't hire a lot of veterans at all. But Google is smart enough about what society is going through, what our country is going through, and the respect, even the reverence for soldiers coming out of the service and going overseas and being at risk and under fire to protect our freedoms. Even Google's doing it. Facebook is doing it. And these are not people who hire a lot of veterans. No offense. They've both been clients of mine over the years. There's no more well-prepared young people than people getting out of the service. And a little bit of preparation, and you will kill it. And if you do the preparation that we ask you want, I'll spend some time with somebody to help them figure out what they're not doing well.
I mean, I love that. I think that the emphasis on preparation is incredible, and I love that thought of being out of your comfort zone. And I'm realizing more and more that all growth, all good things come in that zone of proximal development, come right at that edge of the comfort zone, and that this may be at that zone, but that's a good sign. And I really like you're saying too, like the second time you do things, you improve so much. And all the things that people have done in the military over and over and over again, it's just no different. It's just a matter of approaching this with that growth mindset and putting in the preparation necessary.
I will tell you, I love being prepared. Partly because some people say I don't want to prepare because I don't want to sound like I'm speechifying. You won't get the precise question you've prepared for, but you will be so. The whole point of preparation is so that in the moment, you have more of your brain available to think about options. You're calmer, and that makes you more creative. It makes you more focused, you more intense. And I'll tell you, I interviewed my admin once. I may have mentioned this last time, for 50 hours over several weeks. Now, if you're not ready for that, you're not going to do well. period. But if you know yourself, and that's a key thing that people mistake. Oh, I need to study companies. You don't study companies. 30 minutes understanding the job as best you can and the company you're going to work for at a high level are probably all you really need. If you had 10 hours to prepare, I would give you 9.5 hours on yourself and a half an hour on the company.
What does that what does that look like? Kind of the self knowledge piece, or do you have any tactical thoughts on how to approach
Sure.
understanding oneself in
Oh
that way?
gosh, this is one of my favorite questions. People almost never ask it, Justin. So I'm so glad you did. It's going to take me a couple of minutes, but I just want to walk you through the logic. Okay, when I'm going to use the example of I'm interviewing Justin. Okay, so when I'm interviewing you, I am essentially comparing you, as I understand you, based on your ability to communicate with me, your skills and abilities, traits and characteristics. I'm comparing you to a list of criteria that I have for the job that I'm looking for. And in my head, the story I'm telling myself is, can I picture Justin doing this job? Now, there's an important principle involved in all interviews. There are, for any job that any recruiter, like in this case, me interviewing you, for any job in the world with somebody interviewing, there are 1,000,000 people in the world, if not 100 million, who could do the job. Okay, so just the math of that is irrefutable. So this goes to the next, which is, because they know there are so many possible people out there, there is a whittling down process that happens before I ever interview Justin. Okay, there may be a phone screen and so on, but here's the key: if you are being interviewed, the chances are 95% or greater that the choice of them interviewing you gives you enough data to believe, or you ought to be willing to believe, even if you don't think it's true. I know it's true. You could do the job by definition. Look, if there are 1,000 people that are possible for this job, it obviously, in theory, I would interview all 1,000, but I don't have the time or the inclination. So we whittle it down to the people that we think are most likely to be able to do good at it. And we're making fairly small distinctions when we do the final interview. Okay. So I'm interviewing you. You don't realize it, but in my head, the only question is, how well will you do the job? Not whether you can or not. Okay? That's the first thing. And if that doesn't lift the spirits of some of your listeners, I don't know what would. Right? You're thinking, I don't know if I can do the job. Don't be foolish. The interviewer, by definition, already thinks you can. So that's happened. So now I'm interviewing you. I'm trying to figure out, of a list of skills, how many of those skills you can do. Okay. And I want to give you an analogy. I want you to think of a Western movie or a TV you've watched over the years, and there's a town out on the walk into the main street. It's a dirt street, and there's places that tie up horses, and there's a mercantile shop or a dry goods shop. There's a store, right? And you walk into the store, and inevitably, in the old time West, behind the counter, there are a series of tables that have all kinds of goods and products and so on. And typically what would happen is you would point to things, and the mercantilist would give you the stuff, unlike today's modern grocery store, for instance, which is self-serve. Okay. That's what you are in an interview, the store manager. You have behind you a whole bunch of skills and abilities, traits and characteristics. The interviewer is that customer that has come up, and they're going to say, I want some of this and this and this and this and this. Okay. You're going to have to know what you've done based on the questions they've asked, and take those things out of those cubby holes and hand them to you, hand them to the recruiter. The person who does best is the person who, A, has rehearsed the most, and B, done the right self-preparation about their own background. Okay. That's your job, is to know yourself. Big, I mean, in terms of sort of theoretical mistakes that people make, is they say, "Oh, I know myself. I'm good about myself. I really need to study the company." Wrong. Studying the company is a waste of time. You're not going to impress us with how much you know about our company, because we guarantee you. The focus of the first of all interviews is about you, about your skills, your traits, your abilities, your characteristics. So we need to do some study. And the person who says, "Well, I know myself. I live with myself all the time." No, that's not the answer. The answer is, how well have you studied your background and actually learned a little bit maybe about what things you've done through some focused study, and I'll explain how in just a second, so that if he asks you about an example where you've done X, you can immediately go, I have this example, or no, I have a different example. Or, what they're asking for is leadership, and this particular company is very friendly to employees. So I'm going to give this example where I achieved something as a leader, but I was also really sensitive to my team. You can't do that in an interview without having spent 5 or 10 hours studying your background, studying what you've done, drawing conclusions about what skills, traits, abilities, and characteristics you used in the past. Because, as I think I said last time, most of the companies in the world, most likely, you're going to be given a behavioral interview where the company's going to ask you a series of examples from where you led a team or achieved an objective or overcame a weakness, whatever it might be, and you have to have an example of that so that they can hear you use addressing a problem that they believe exists in their job today, and they want you to be able to describe what you did and how you did it. So they can close their eyes. Remember the example I had of interviewing you. I want to be able to close my eyes and see you using those skills. You're describing them in your past, but I want to project you into the future and see whether or not you can actually do the job I have based on the questions I ask, which are based on an analysis of the job that I am recruiting for. Okay. How do you do that research? So the first thing you do is set aside some time. You'll probably need 2 nights. It will probably take only 1 hour each night. No, let's do 3 nights, depending upon how old your audience member is. The first one is you're going to ask yourself, and this is 1 night and it's 1 hour. Now, guys, if I ever were to interview you for some reason, and I know you heard this talk, and I asked you on a preparation you did, and you didn't think you could have spent this hour because you were too busy watching TV, don't complain to me that you don't get the job you want. Okay? Turn off the TV, put down your damn phone, okay? The whole fear of missing out thing, get over that and be focused, right? Just like I don't know, when I was in the Army, the one thing you did before you were going to be engaged was clean your, right? So this is cleaning your, it's a professional preparing. Here's what you do. You're going to sit down for an hour. You can use note paper. You can use a laptop if you want, but folks, turn off the Wi-Fi. So the laptop is essentially a typewriter. Turn off the Wi-Fi and you won't turn off your email client. You're not going to be focused enough to be effective at this. Okay. I can tell you, when I was first teaching this 30 years ago, we used 3x5 cards. So I'm going to give you a different example than the general mercantile store one. I'm going to say to you, what you're going to do is, for those of you, I think most people, if you've never been to a library, you know what the inside of a library looks like from images, and you know what a card catalog file looks like, where you're standing in front of the card catalog and there are a whole bunch of long drawers in front of you with cards, basically 3x5 cards with every book's title or author in the on one of the cards, and a book might be listed multiple places in fiction and by author and by title and so on, or even by Dewey Decimal System. Okay. What you're going to do is this. You're going to ask yourself a question. And by the way, it's going to take 3 nights, 1 hour each. And the first night, you're going to focus on high school. Second night, if you have it, you're going to focus on college. Third night, you're going to focus on your professional life. If you've spent more than 10 years in the military, then I recommend you don't do the high school one. Spend one night on college and then 2 nights on your military experience. If you didn't go to college and you have 10 years in the service, spend 3 nights in a row thinking about your military experience. And let's say in the 10 years you had, I'm going to make this up, 12 jobs. I would say, okay, I'm going to spend with the first hour on the first 4 jobs, the second hour on the next 4 jobs, and the final hour on the last four jobs. That's overly simplified, but that's a way to help you decide how to spend your time. 3 nights, 1 hour a night. And here's what you're going to do. For the time period you're thinking about, high school, college, any period of time in the service, I want you to ask yourself, what did I accomplish that was significant? Okay. Now, as an aside, I think we talked last time about resumes. Our resume podcast has been downloaded millions of times now. I mentioned some of your folks have reached out to Wendy. If you have an accomplishment bullet, and by the way, if you don't know what I mean when I say accomplishment bullet, your resume, no offense, don't take offense at that. I apologize. Your resume stinks because the average resume we see is terrible. No offense to the military, we see it from everybody. It doesn't matter what job you're in. People think that they can throw a resume together real fast. Then they make mistakes, and that doesn't help their career or the perception of their professionalism. Okay, so at nothing else, for every accomplishment bullet on your resume, that must be, if you've already done your resume, that one of the accomplishments from that time period. Okay, if you have 5 jobs in the Navy and you have a couple of accomplishment bullets on the first 2 or 3, and then 3 or 4 bullets on the last couple, every single accomplishment bullets would become the core of an accomplishment. Okay, that fact, if it's on your resume, you can safely assume that someone in one of your interviews will ask you, tell me about this thing here. Tell me more about that. And that is a significant accomplishment question, a standard behavioral interviewing question. Okay, so you're going to think about that. You're going to spend an hour and you're going to write down on the front of a 3x5 card, 1 card per accomplishment, anything that you achieved while you were doing so. Examples. I was on the honor roll in my high school. I graduated in the top 5% of my class. I was the co-captain of the women's basketball team. I was the first trombone in the school band. Okay. Whatever accomplishments you want. Maybe you're valedictorian. Maybe your goal was just to make the JV tennis team. It really doesn't matter. Okay. Don't stress about the quality of your accomplishments. There's nothing you can do about that now. All you can do is prepare to deliver whatever you have as best you can. Okay. So you're going to in front of the 3x5 card. You probably need, for each time period in your life, let's assume that if you're in a job for a year, you need 4 accomplishments. If you're in high school, if you're talking about high school for an hour, you need 4 to 6 accomplishments. Don't worry that the last 2 seem pretty weak. That doesn't matter. We're not worried about that. First of all, you probably have negative self-talk about that. Second of all, it'll depend on what job you're interviewing for. Third, and perhaps this is most important, most people struggle to remember anything about the past. And you're lucky you've probably had to think about it a little bit in your resume. In any event, let's say, I'm gonna make it even easier, 5 to 7 accomplishments from high school, college, and then if you've got a 10-year career, shoot for 15 accomplishments. Obviously, we'd like to see them. We don't want 14 from your first job that was 10 years ago and 1 since then. We want some randomness associated with the distribution of your accomplishments over time. Okay. All right. So we have a bunch of 3 to 5 cards. Let's say we have 25 of them. Now, I want you to think about, so that's the part of the hour, and it'll probably take you half an hour. The next part of the hour, and you may go a little long, is to ask yourself, okay, think about that particular accomplishment. And again, you would write it down on the front of the card. I was high school valedictorian. Okay. Then what you do is you say, okay, if I had to describe 4 words, the skills I used to achieve that, the abilities that I use, the traits of my personality, or the characteristics of my personality, my being, if you will. Skills and traits are learned, skills and abilities are learned. Traits and characteristics are more innate. And I want you, for each one of those accomplishments, to ask what skill, what trait, what ability, what characteristic, STAC, stack, do I think this shows about me? Is it grittiness? Is it drive? Is it enthusiasm? Is it ability to work with others? Now, you might think back on, maybe you were, your class secretary, for instance. Well, you had to go shake hands and ask people for your vote. So maybe there was some determination. Maybe there was some plan. Maybe there was some personal relationships. Maybe there was some marketing, putting your name out there on posters all over the school and so on. And you write down all of the skills, traits, abilities, and character that are associated with that accomplishment on the back of the 3 to 5 card. Okay. You're going to do that for all 3 parts of your life. That's the first half. Okay. Then you're going to take all of those, and I recommend you put them all together. And in the 4th night, I want you to, and this is much easier if you want to use some technology, but we used to do it by using a copier with 5 cards and putting several of the 3 to 5 cards on the copier and then cutting up the copy that we made. I want you to make as many copies of that 3 by 5 card as it has skills, traits, abilities, or characteristics on the back of it. So let's say I was co-captain of my junior varsity tennis team. Now you might be saying to yourself, golly, I really wish I had been captain of the varsity. But guys, you can't do anything about that. Let's worry about the things we can control and leave out the things we can't control. You were co-captain of your junior varsity tennis team. You ask yourself, you look at it and you realize there are 5 skills, traits, characteristics, or abilities that I think that shows about me. It doesn't matter whether you're right. Somebody else is going to be more right than you talking about your past. Okay. You're going to make 5 copies. Actually, you're going to make 4 copies plus the original of that card, the accomplishment on the front, and the 5 skills, traits, abilities, and characteristics it shows about you, even if it's not at a very high level. You're going to make 5 copies of that card. Okay. You're going to do that for every one of the cards. Okay. You see where a database would be helpful. But the card thing is helpful because it helps you feel and see what we're getting at. Now what I want you to do is I want you, let's say on that example of junior varsity co-captain, there are 5 copies of the card. I want you to take on the back of those 5 cards, I want you to highlight one of the skills, traits, abilities, and characteristics, a different one on each of the 5. So now you have 5 cards that are identical front and back, except that on the back of each of the 5 cards, a different one of the skills, traits, abilities, and characteristics is highlighted. Okay. Now, I want you do that for all the cards, and now you've got. Well, I'm guessing you have. Let's say, and you've got 5 skills, abilities, and traits and characteristics. Now you've got 100 cards, right? I'm saying 5 for each one of them. That's an oversimplification, but you can do the math. Now you've got 100 cards, each one of which has one trait, ability, or characteristic highlighted. What I want you to do now is take the first one on the stack, and whatever skill or trait or characteristic or ability it has, I want you to put it, just the one that's highlighted. Let's say it's leadership. You're going to start a stack called leadership. The next one of those cards says interpersonal skills, and you're going to start a stack that any card that has interpersonal skills highlighted will go on top of that card that has highlighted. Okay, you could put in here. We are now going to have, at the end of our 100 cards, we might have 6 or 7 examples achieving something. Highlight interpersonal skills. So now when a company says, give me an example of a time where you had to use interpersonal skills to achieve something significant, you've already thought through your back and you know the accomplishment you want to talk about. What you end up with visually is what amounts to a card catalog file, and the labels on the front of each of the drawers are a skill, a trait, an ability, or a characteristic. And if you're interviewing at a particular company that 3 or 4 of those skills, traits, abilities, characteristics, or values of the company seem to be related, you'll go through all your cards and go, which one of my accomplishments is the most unique, most strong, that also highlights a couple of 3 or 4 of the type of skills and abilities that company is looking for. That's it. Okay. Now, for an interview with Google or Facebook or Georgia Pacific or International General Motors or Tesla or SpaceX or Apple or Microsoft, whatever. I know which job I'm interviewing for. If you don't know what to think about it, send Wendy your resume and the job as best you can find out, and she'll send you a paragraph back and say, here's what you need to be thinking about. And you'll say, okay, which of my accomplishments from my past do I think are most closely aligned with the kind of questions and interview questions I'm going to get from this company? Now, okay, so now you know roughly the battlefield where the skirmish is going to be fought between you and the company. Now all we have to do, we've got accomplishments already prepared and analyzed in our background. I'm not saying it'll be easy, and it'll take you a couple of nights to get good at it, and that's okay. Don't wish for it to be easy. Wish for the strength to be effective at it. Then the next thing you're going to do is prepare answers. You need to know how to answer. Tell me about a significant accomplishment. And what you're going to do is you're going to take each one of those accomplishments. You're going to spend more time on the more current ones, obviously. If you spent 20 years in the military, you don't need to develop significant accomplishments from your experiences in high school, which were, 5 years before. Something more current would be better. But now you're going to say, okay, one of my most significant accomplishments was that I was Salesman of the Year at Procter & Gamble, as an example. I'm making that up. Okay, I was Salesman of the Year. And now I'm going to break it down into its component parts, some podcasts about that to help people understand how to answer the tell me about yourself, how to answer significant accomplishments, how to answer weakness. Anyway, for significant accomplishment answers, they all follow the same basic structure. The first sentence of the answer, you tell the person what you did, the accomplishment you achieved. You do not tell interviewers a story. Okay. You do not say, well, let me walk it through everything. That's wrong. You start out with the end. My first sentence would be, if you were interviewing me, Justin, would be, one of my most significant was when I was Salesman of the Year at Procter & Gamble in my first year that I was employed there. Boom. That's it. Okay. And as a general rule, you want to avoid commas in that first sentence if you can go to the next. Okay. Then the next thing you do is you're going to give me a little bit of background. If I were being interviewed by you, it would sound something like this. In my first year as a health and personal care representative, I was responsible for Crest toothpaste, Scope mouthwash, and something called Paradex. And I was one of 6 people reporting to my boss, territory in Houston. And I basically drove around in my car through all of Houston and South Texas, convincing doctors and dentists and periodontists to use our products, to recommend our products to their customers, to help drive store sales, grocery store sales. Okay, that's the context, the second part of the answer. answer is I describe my approach and then I detail the approach in more detail. For instance, I would say something like, there were three things that were really important to me. Three is that led me to be highly successful. One is a concerted effort to build a relationship with the largest dental chain practice in my territories. The second thing that I discovered was very important was a relationship with the Dental Society, which got me introduced to many, many dentists who did a great deal of business. That's an example of two of the three pillars that I had in my head in my first job out of the Army, working for Procter & Gamble. And for those people who are still wondering what it is they're going to do, if you'd ever told me that I'd wear a suit, work for Procter & Gamble, and drive around selling toothpaste, I'd have said you're crazy. And the second thing I would tell you is, if you think you're above that, let me tell you, I did very well in school at the academy. I went to West Point. I'm very proud of that. Beat Navy. We just beat them this past weekend.
I wasn't gonna bring that up. I was Naval Academy. I was gonna avoid that one if I could.
Yeah. Beat Navy 3 years in a row after you guys beating the tar out of us for 14 years in a row. We need a few here. Some charity would be nice. So and people always are impressed by the academy, but people in corporate America are much more impressed by my experience at Procter & Gamble. Okay. And if you ever told me that I'd go sell toothpaste, I'd be like, no, I'm smarter than that. And yet what impresses people in the corporate world is the Procter experience, not the West Point experience. So my point just being, if your people think they know anything, I didn't know anything either. I didn't know that I was going to go to work for Procter & Gamble. If you told me I would accept a job selling toothpaste, I'd be like, no, I'm sorry, no. And I did. And it's been one of the smartest things, the two smartest professional things I ever did, ever, other than starting my own company, was my choice to go to West Point and my choice to take a job with Procter & Gamble, turning higher off because I figured Procter & Gamble couldn't hurt me. Okay. So now, and I walk through each one of the areas, giving more details, and should be 3 to 4 minutes long. And the recruiter will still be interrupting me. So I will actually probably end up giving that question, and interruptions or probes that the interviewer asks may last as long as 5 to 8 to even 10 minutes in an hour-long interview. And so you're going to create those answers. Okay. You're going to think through what you did and the background of the situation from 2, 3, 5 years ago. If you've got a bad memory, that's not helpful. And so that should be a good reminder that in the future, you're going to want to of your accomplishments by once a quarter, giving yourself a half an hour, either at home or at work, before you go home one night, and sit down and say, okay, in the last quarter, in the last 90 days, what things have I done that meet the it's some accomplishment. I don't care how great it is. I want at least 5 accomplishments in that quarter. So at the end of the year, when you're updating your resume and making it current, you'll have 20 or so accomplishments, and you can throw away the bottom 10 and keep only the top 10. And if it's on your resume, you should be able to answer tell me about a significant accomplishment, what you did and how you did it, and be able to talk about it cogently. Now, one more thing. So you've done all this preparation. And I'm not saying it's trivial, but because it takes time, but it's not complex. Okay. It's not hard in the sense of complex or difficult to understand. It just requires some discipline. And that's how a lot of military people are going to win in the job market in the next 12 to 18 months, is discipline. All things being equal, I want somebody who's super smart, who works really hard, who's ambitious, and who's nice. But you know what? You can come across as smart and working hard and ambitious simply by the level of preparation you put into it. I would much rather hire the person who is busting his tail and was a college and had a good career than the person was a 4.0 in college, had an awesome career, but then acts as if he should be handed something on a silver platter in my interview. Because I'm not going to hire that guy. I'd rather hire the person who busted it and knew that he had to bust his tail, even if he didn't really know what he's doing in his transition. Okay, one last thing we need to do. Actually, 2 steps. You're going to start practicing the 2 big things you're going to get in an interview. It's rehearsal time. Maybe the previous process takes you 10 evenings, and now for the rest of the time after those first 10 evenings, you're going to be rehearsing. And you're going to rehearse 2 questions. One is, tell me about your, and the other one is, give me an example of a significant accomplishment. I would recommend that on the first day you practice, it'll only take you 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes. You will either talk into your phone or carry around a handheld, talking to the microphone on your computer. You could do it on an iPad or something like that. And you're going to ask yourself, tell me about yourself. And then you're going to give your answer. And as we know, the first time you're going to give it, you're going to stink at it. It's going to be, and I don't care about that. The key point in the human condition is not the fact that we stink at things the first time we do it. It's that we're smart enough and we have consciousness enough to try it a second time and to get better, right? Part of the time when you're not good at something in order to reap the rewards of actually becoming good at it. Okay, so what we're going to do is the first, let's say we're on the way in the Air Force. We're driving to work and we've got a 15-minute commute, let's say, or let's say it's a 30-minute commute. I'm going to have my phone out. I'm going to put on the voice recording and I'm going to record myself saying my tell me about yourself answer. Okay. I'm going to practice more accomplishment answers. And what I'm going to do is carry around those 3x5 cards, or it can be in a spreadsheet or in a database or relational database, so that I can quickly recall an example. And then I'm going to do a significant accomplishment answer using that example off the top of my head. I'm going to choose 2 different ones, and that should take about 20 minutes in the car, for instance, in a commute. Okay. That will be tell me about yourself, significant accomplishment answers. After you've done tell me about yourself 20 or 30 times, you can go to only doing that one once a week. Okay? Don't worry that your significant accomplishment answers will sound fake or rehearsed. There is no way everybody's answers are going to sound fake or rehearsed. And you're just going to practice those every day for 2 weeks, audio only. But you will, the moment after you record them, put recording aside and not listen to it until the next morning. And the reason why is if you listen to a recording of yourself right after you do it, you sound good. It takes you 24 hours for your brain to have forgotten how you delivered that previous answer. And when you listen to it the second morning, you're like, wow, that was horrible. But then you're going to get better because right after you do that, listen to how horrible yesterday's was, you're going to record today's example and you're going to get better one step at a time. For a couple of weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks if you have enough time. Now I want you to add in every Saturday night. You are going to sit down across. You can prop your phone up on a chair or whatever, and you're going to sit in a chair or on the couch, and you're going to answer, tell me about yourself, and different examples of significant accomplishments, and you're yourself. And you will not watch that videotape until the next morning. And you'll think, wow, that was good. And then you'll watch the next morning and go, oh, that was horrible. I got to sit up. I got to smile more. I got to look at the camera a little bit more. I got to stop stuttering. And you're going to do that for 2 or 3 weeks. If you go through this process, which took me, 20 minutes to get through, the only thing that will hold, in my opinion, literally, nearly, is a company not hiring. I will take 10% more attitude to replace 90% less ability any day of the week. I want attitude, and the way I assess attitude is how hard people are willing to work. That's the process. That's the tactical process that I've been recommending for the last 30 years.
This is fantastic, and for listeners who may be flying a plane, parachuting, driving a ship while listening to this, I took notes when Mark was talking, and in the show notes, I'll have a summary of this so you can reference that and go through that. But that's such an exceptional process. It made me think of that quote by attributed to Henry Kissinger when he would meet with the press corps and he would say, "Does anybody have any questions for my answers?" And I love that thought of just really dialing in and buttoning up all of your answers so that when they ask a question, you can slot it in. You can slot in that accomplishment. I just love the way that Mark took through the accomplishment and the details, and a great way to practice. Mark, I know we're at our end of our time. Thank you so much again for being generous with your time. And for listeners, I'll have links to the relevant podcasts from Mark that relate to these conversations, because there's a wealth of knowledge there, thousands and thousands of episodes there.
There's no better time in armed forces to be getting out of the service. I don't want anybody to get out of the service just to get out. If serving your country under fire or preparing to be under fire is the cause that you want to serve, I honor that, and there are days I miss it. If you're thinking about getting out and you're wondering how good the marketplace is and nobody's told you, the marketplace is red hot. If you do your practice, you will be successful. Simple as that. Surface.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond the Uniform. There are over 200 free episodes at beyondtheuniform.io. They're classified by the industry of focus, the functional role the person plays, and more. Beyond the Uniform is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Justin Asiri. Our Director of Outreach, responsible for sponsorship and guest episodes, is Steve Bain. Our editor, responsible for the show notes and text transcripts for all episodes, is Kathleen Dillon. Our data analytics and insights advisor is Andrew Woolridge. If you are enjoying Beyond the Uniform, you can help us out by telling your veterans and friends in the military about this free resource. There is more information on the website about how you can sponsor an episode or donate to our program to help us grow the work that we're doing. Be sure to check out the coaching section of beyondtheuniform.io, where you can be paired with professional, subsidized coaches to help you figure out your next career move. You can sign up for our newsletter to be up to date on the latest happenings at Beyond the Uniform. And in each show notes section, there is a link to audible.com, which is providing a free audiobook of your choice to Beyond the Uniform listeners. You get a free book of your choosing, and Beyond the Uniform gets $15 to subsidize the cost of the show, regardless of whether you continue with audible.com or not. Check that out and more in the show notes for this episode. Keep the feedback coming. Let me know what resources would help you in your career, and we'll do our best to make that happen. Take care, be safe, and I'll be back next week with more interviews with military veterans about their civilian career.